Growing up in England, I grew up in a community that was predominantly from the Windrush community here in London. So I would say growing up in the inner city, the first challenge I think I would face would be there was some stop and search sometimes with the police. Not knowing, because we were very loud and boisterous as young people. So only when you're older you understand why you'd be stopped by the police, because you're a bit loud. But at the time, you thought you looked on it as a hindrance. So I would say that was the first thing. Sometimes when you go to the shop, you might go to, I don't know, name any particular supermarket, and sometimes you see the security following you around. But as a person who grew up with a sense of humour, I've always used the opportunity to a positive. So for example, if I can't find something, the security guard who's following me around, I say, yeah, do you know where I could find so-and-so? So I try to turn the negative into a positive. So I would say those were the main two issues. If I had to give my younger self advice, I would say to be patient and always use emotional intelligence when dealing with situations. Sometimes you could get angry and upset, but in most cases that just doesn't help anything, and that could just sometimes make situations worse. But by using emotional intelligence, it makes you be more strategic and more positive with your impact when dealing with certain issues. Harold Moody, a lot of people don't know that he was a person from he came before the Windrush generation to the UK, and he was a lawyer who lived in the UK. He was of Caribbean parentage, and he was a lawyer who worked in the UK. And not only was he a lawyer, he was also a civil rights activist here in the UK. Normally when we hear about Black History Month, we hear about Martin Luther King and people in America. But many of us ignore the fact that there were some great people here in the UK who've done some great work. So I would say Harold Moody is one. Walter Tull, I think he was one of the first football players who played professional football in the UK. And not only that, when it came to wartime, he fought in the World War I. So people like him, I would say, were very inspirational. And also people like Ambrose Mendy, who was a young footballer at the academy for a Division 1 team at the time, and then it never worked out, and then he became a football agent and a sports agent. So at that time, in the 70s and 80s, so at that time there weren't really many people of African, Afro-Caribbean heritage who were working not only on the football pitch, they were working behind the scenes. So I would say these were the most inspirational people to me. Black History Month, to me, it means a celebration of diversity here in the UK. Yes, racism does exist, I'm not denying that. But as someone who's travelled the world, I've travelled to Europe, I've travelled to Asia, I've travelled to the Arabian Peninsula, and the racism in those countries is Britain is much better place to live than those places, putting it politely. So Black History Month is a time to celebrate diversity here in the UK, and it's time for people to understand what contributions Black people have made to the country and to the world. And not only that, it's a time where people get to learn about each other's cultures. So for example, while working with Foundation 92, when I first started, I was amazed. I was asked to work with this pensioner community. As a youth worker, it was a bit out of my comfort zone. But anyway, it's a pensioner community. And they were telling me for Black History Month, they organized a Caribbean cook-up. So at first I was a bit apprehensive because I was the only person of color there. So, but when they told me, yeah, for Black History Month, we organize a Caribbean cook-up, we cook jerk chicken. And I thought, oh my gosh. So that made me see another aspect of Black History Month that I never knew about. So that's what Black History Month is about sharing cultural stories, cultural practices, food, and the positives and negatives of history. I'm originally from London, and originally when I left school, I used to work in banking. So I used to work for NatWest Bank. I got offered a scholarship from the Bank of England, but because NatWest Bank were paying more money, I went the NatWest way. And then unfortunately, my nephew and some of the friends I grew up with were involved in gangs, drugs, and things like this. And I was getting sick and tired of it. Sometimes, and then my sister had my spare key. So what happened was I came home from work one day, and my sister was sitting in my front room because she had my spare key. When you're the youngest person in the family, you'll understand where I'm coming from. And sitting there with my nephew with 2 suitcases, and she said, you can't take him no more. He's got to come and stay with you. And she walked out, leaving my nephew there. So this, by default, got me into youth work. So because I had to deal with my nephew, and some of my friends that I went to school with, they were kept on calling me, telling me, oh, can you come to court? Can you give a good word on me because I've got caught doing this and that? And I said, okay, I'm going to start organising some youth programs. So while I was working in the bank 9 to 5, on the evening and weekends, I would organise youth programs, which I funded myself. If I knew someone's got like a clothing line or a little business, I would get them to sponsor it. And then what happened was I was approached by the head of the local authority in northwest London. So it's the London Borough of Brent, for those that don't know. And they were saying, look, we've got some issues in these areas and in these schools, and we were hoping if you could help us to do some work there. So this was something that made me think, I'll be real, I got another job. This is something that I do because of some young people in the community and my nephew. So they said, no, we'll pay you for it. So I went part-time at the bank, and then that project went well because I was working in some schools and some pupil referral units and some community centres. And then they said, look, we want to take you on as a consultant. And so then I left banking and I got into youth work. So while working into youth work, I then got called by someone who was working with the Home Office. And he was saying, look, we need you to do some projects not only in London, but in Birmingham, Manchester, and Sheffield too. So I started to do some work with an organisation who were working as a subsidiary to the Home Office, where we was dealing with issues around gangs, drugs, extremism, radicalisation, and antisocial behaviour. So I had to facilitate mentoring projects, outreach projects, and thankfully with a great team, and that's how I got involved. In that process, my missus is from Manchester, and she hated London, okay? And anyone who's got a missus knows a happy wife is a happy life. So under good advice from my friend who's been married for a long time, he said, look, if your wife don't like London, why are you here? Why are you getting? So cut a long story short, I moved to Manchester. And then I moved to Manchester because I was already doing some work in Manchester, in Heaton, Mersey, for the organisation, and in Moss Side. And then when I moved to Manchester, I started to do some freelance work and started to do some work in schools and crews. And then I found out about Foundation 92. As an Arsenal supporter, I watched Arsenal Fan TV, and I saw the video when Gary Neville spoke to Arsenal Fan TV, and I liked the way that he gave his answers. I liked what he said, and I thought, oh, okay, he's not, as a Arsenal fan, it's not that bad as an ex-Man United player. And then from that, I saw an opportunity with Foundation 92. I said, let me apply. And that's how I got with Foundation 92. And I've been learning a lot from the management team, Damon, Lee Wallace, Tom, Matt, and the rest of the staff, Cameron, and everyone else. So yeah, that's why I'm here.